doing this last trip for the season. Without any further ado, I'm really excited. And again, thanks everybody so much for the support and joining us in today's final Ngoma conversation for the semester. Brother Ulysses Butch Slaughter and I had a conversation about this. I'm not really sure how long I've known him, but I know it's been for a while. And one of the things, if you know Butch, he is consistent and constant in regards to what I refer to as life-changing advocacy work. He's a reconciliation advocate who designs diverse art forums and forums to examine how people betray people. Today's presentation is phenomenal, and I'm not going to take anything away from it by saying too much about it, but a little bit more about his background. He is a native of Chicago, Illinois. Strangely enough, a week and a half ago, I was in Chicago for a conference for the whole week. He's been thrust into the consideration of reconciliation at age 12, when unfortunately he witnessed his mother being killed by his father. Among his many artistic projects that explore human betrayal, he has successfully led an effort to have the city of Philadelphia formally apologize for the 1985 MOVE bombing that took the lives of 6 adults and 5 children under the age of 5. Over the course of 2 years, he has facilitated a series of community forums and eventually drafted the formal apology, which was adopted by the city of Philadelphia in the fall of 2020. He is a veteran of the United States Navy, holds a master's degree in human services from Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. And if you know anything about Chester, you are very much aware of his work in and throughout the city of Chester. It is both a pleasure and an honor to introduce to some, reintroduce to others, Brother Ulysses Butch Slaughter.
Deep breath. What's up, Richard? Thank you so much, my brother. I appreciate you and Dr. Wise giving me this opportunity to talk about something that is incredibly humbling to be part of. I'm honored to be part of this. I am honored to once again show up on a Widener platform where I think it's very, very appropriate for this conversation to be taking place. I see a lot of faces that I'm familiar with as well. Lots of people that have been very supportive of my work over years. I got to point out my sister girl, Mickey Davis. Hey, Mickey. Go way back. I see my man, Steve Fisher. I see Jen Wan. I see just a lot of people who, without them, like you, Richard, this work gets really tough. This kind of work gets really tough. So having people like you all around me has helped this tremendously. I want to get right to it because I'm hoping to hold as much time for question answer conversation as possible, because I think that's where I find my next best ideas, is when I'm exchanging with the people who are part of these presentations. So I'm presenting something today that I call the Walker Williams Project. And the Walker Williams Project is the outgrowth of some years, actually, of my engagement with a particular family. And I had no idea when I first met this family back in 2019 that I would be still doing this work 4 years later in a different way. So I'm going to start with talking about, I want to talk a little bit about Black history. I want to talk about Black African history, African American history, because it really is a big part of this story. And one of Widener's most celebrated athletes on this first slide here, we see in the lower left, in the left-hand corner, we see Walker Carter Jr. Walker is his first name. But when I was putting this project together, I started thinking, do I want to call it the Carter Williams Project, the Walker Williams Project? I just like the way, I like alliteration. So I said, I'm going to call this the Walker Williams Project. So Walker Carter, they called him Baby Carter, Walker Baby Carter Jr. was an athlete, an athlete, an outstanding student at Widener University. I'm gonna get to more of that in a moment. But this is why, for me, having this conversation with the Widener community is so important because he left a legacy that I think is still yet to be explored, as well as to be shared across the world. I think it's going to become that kind of story. Can we go to the next slide, Brother Richard? So I like to view myself as curating the art of justice. And what does that mean to me? It means looking at different ways of addressing the ongoing issue of justice. And I think art is a great way to do that. So I've had opportunities with my buddy Steve Fisher over at the Chester Housing Authority to curate events, environmental justice events, huge environmental justice events around MLK Day in the city of Chester. I've had an opportunity to see people like Dr. Phil. I've had opportunities to work with the Oprah Winfrey Network. And as Brother Richard mentioned earlier, I played a huge role, huge humbling role in working with former Philadelphia Mayor W. Wilson Good Sr. and the Africa family in making the MOVE apology happen. Again, for those who are not familiar with the MOVE apology or the MOVE bombing, May 13th, 1985, now some 38 years ago, almost 38 years ago, the Philadelphia Police Department, under orders of the city government, dropped a bomb at 6221 Osage Avenue and killed 11 people when, in fact, the only thing that was supposed to happen was an arrest warrant was supposed to be served. And as it turns out, they dropped a bomb on that row home and wound up destroying well over 60 homes, leaving more than 250 people homeless and leaving a wound, a still yet to be fully healed wound in West Philadelphia, in Philadelphia, all across the country, I believe. Nobody had ever seen such a thing. So I was proud to be part of an effort to get an apology. And once the apology was done, there were some other things that were possible, but the apology helped to set the stage for those things that would come later. So I'm curating the art of justice in many different ways. And that curation actually began with my father, who's shown in the lower right-hand corner. That's my father sitting at my mother's gravestone on June 25th, 2011. It's 33 years after she passed away. 33 years had gone by. My father didn't even know where my mother's gravesite was. And I took my father to that gravesite, and he died less than a year later. So reconciliation, forgiveness is a part of who I am. And I always tell people there's no one size fits all reconciliation. There's no one size fits all forgiveness, but I believe that there's a way to get to it if you want to get to it. I tell people you don't have to do anything, but I remember when my father passed away, how grateful I was that I had pursued something like forgiveness and reconciliation. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right. So big part of my presentation today is really about remembering our friends, our family as part of Black history and as part of history in general. So while I'm talking, I'm just asking you to think about who you remember that is part of Black history. And we don't have to say their names out loud, but if you want to think about those people who were part of your Black history, part of those beautiful, powerful memories that inspire you on days when you don't feel so your best, please take a moment to remember them. I want to think about the word remember in a little bit of a different way. I always tell people that remembering is more than a cognitive exercise. It's not just about thinking backward. It's also about remembering. I talk about remembering as putting the members back together. When we were talking about remember, move, I really wanted to emphasize that we needed to put the story back together. We needed to remember, put the members of the story, the pieces back together. And that's what I hope to do today with this presentation, is to remember something that happened. We go to the next slide, please. All right, so we can skip this one. So we do want to inform the future. If we could go to the next one, please. All right, so at this point, we can go to the next one even. This is the Walker Williams Project. And if you would, Brother Richard, can we run the first video? This first video, before you start, brother, I did this first video as part of the some work I was doing with the Pennsylvania Humanities Council back in 2019. I did a series of short films that were sponsored by PECO. PECO is the Pennsylvania Electric Company, and they sponsored 4 films that I did. And they wanted me to do one about a man named Walker Carter Jr. This is that film. You can run it now, please.
Wedding anniversary. We did a family photo shoot here before my grandpa died. I mean, Walker Lee, he was Walker Wesley, and this was Walker Lee. Their wedding day.
This is when he won the championship.
These are his siblings.
Mm-hmm.
We appreciated what he did for us as a family. We really did. He was just a good husband and a good father, good friend.
He was just a really great father. Always made me feel safe. Always made me feel worthy, appreciated, love, like everything. Everything that any father would want his daughter to feel like. He made me feel like, and to this day, I'm like, you know, I feel like, you know, I deserve the best because he worked so hard to give me the best. So
he taught us how we should be treated as young ladies, as women, as a wife. Just from seeing how he treated my mother, we knew what was acceptable, what wasn't. And because of that, I knew what to look for. So I appreciate that about him, and so much more.
He will always make himself available to be there for us, even if you know he was too tired. He was always there, and I can always remember coming in the door. And he would, you know, get out of the seat and shake my hand. You know, every single time I encountered him.
I started at Chester High School that September 1971, and I was walking down the hallway, my twin sister and I, and we just saw this gorgeous man. Boy, he was a young man then, of course, but he was just so fine. And my sister and I were standing there looking at him like, and she was looking at him, and I was looking at him, and he just walked by us, and we just followed him as he walked by, like, wow, he's fine. So he just kind of breezed by us because he was Walker Carter. Well, I didn't get to meet him officially because I talked to him briefly sometimes in the hallway because he was just the star of the show with track, football, basketball, all of that. So he just never noticed me. And but then when I went back to, he was at Widener University, of course, and when I started attending Widener, I walked in the English literature class, and there he was, sitting on the left side of the classroom with his football team. That's the way it happened. We just started talking and loving each other from that point on.
he always wanted people to feel like they were special. And so whatever anyone who's watching this is like, was he really that? Yeah, he was.
My children were babies at 1 and 2 years old. We would be in the car, riding through 7th Street in Chester, for example, and he would be doing this the whole time. He would have to wave because they would be, Walker Carter, Walker, yo, Walker, yeah, man, we support you, we love you. You know, because of all that Widener University championship and the whole, you know, he was like one of their 70s heroes. So he would just be waving as he's going down the streets, and to the point that the girls and I was like, we don't want to go no place with you. We're sick of it, because every time we go down the street, we gotta wave, you gotta stop, you gotta talk to people gotta talk to you, you gotta almost sign autographs. So after a while, it became a little annoying, and was like, I don't want to ride with you.
He was raised in Chester, and he was always appreciative of what Chester did for him.
I appreciated how humble he was. For many times we actually watched sports, and I had no clue he was a track star. Won 2 championships in football, in college football, and it just, I didn't know until after he passed.
Lineman wanted to put that memorial up for him because he would go in for their Christmas holidays and Thanksgiving holidays, because he knew they wanted to be with their families. He knew he didn't celebrate, so he was beloved because of that by a lot of the linemen, because he was just a nice guy. They would always say,
hold on a second, let me change the order.
We really like your husband. Whatever he decided to do, he did. And that's the kind of person he was. He never said, oh, I can't do that, or oh, I'm black. I can't be the first black football coach at Widener University. Oh, I can't be the first black track coach at Widener University.
He just thought if he worked hard enough that he could do anything.
All of us are looking forward to what the Bible says, Revelation 21:4, that one day there'll be no sickness, death, pain, or sorrow, and that we know through Jesus Christ, he was resurrected. And we know that that's why Jesus did that, because he set the example to let us know in the future, my husband will have the opportunity to be resurrected. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to seeing him again, possibly marrying him again, because I can do that possibly. So, but I'm looking forward to that because I know I could never find another man like him. He was the bomb.
I remember doing that film back in 2019. It was spring or summer of 2019 when I did that film. And representatives from PECO came out. Miss Claudette Carter, I'm hoping that she's in this group somewhere. Miss Claudette Carter, her mother-in-law. There were a number of people that came out to that event. It's a packed house in a sizable theater. And all I knew at the time was this story. And I remember when we found that clip of that catch, that football, that touchdown, it was such a great thing to find because it had been archived someplace. And I don't remember how we found it, but we found it. And it just felt like the best way to end that film. Well, just this past February, I was at Widener. Brother Richard, you'd remember this, we were there. And Walker Carter's coach from that time frame was in the audience. And he came up to me afterward and he said, you know, that catch that you showed at the end of that film, he said, that was a good catch, but that's not the one that won us the football game. He said, as a matter of fact, Walker was so afraid when they threw him the ball that you wouldn't know that he was afraid. but it was a funny thing to have a coach there who actually knew what was going on. Because see, when you do films like this, you can narrate them in such a way that make things look a particular kind of way. But when he saw that, he said, you know, it was a great way that you laid out that film, but that's not quite what happened. Anyway, all I knew about the Walker Carter family was what I showed on that day. And then I would learn some other things. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Yes, and I just want to let you know, Brother Butch, there's a person named the Carter family who's here.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like her hand is raised, but yes, I can take it to the next slide.
All right. We'll pause for just a minute. I want to get through as much as possible, and then we can get to any questions. So as was mentioned, he was a 1974 graduate of Chester High School, an All-American football and track star at Widener University. He is the first Black football coach and the first Black track coach at Widener University. Widener has a Hall of Fame, and this picture is a picture that I took from that Hall of Fame. I forgot the name of the building. Somebody from here, from Widener, can tell me, but there's a building right off of Melrose. And if you walk up those stairs, you'll find this picture along with a number of other pictures in that Hall of Fame. So Walker was electrocuted on the job in June 2017 while working at PECO. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Now I want to talk about Alexander McClay Williams. Can we show the next film, please?
Do you know this Black boy? Do you know this Black child? His name is Alexander McClay Williams. He is dead now. The state of Pennsylvania killed him in 1931 when he was just 16 years old. The state of Pennsylvania blamed him for something he did not do. The state of Pennsylvania framed him for something he did not do. The state of Pennsylvania said Alexander stabbed a white woman more than 40 times. The state of Pennsylvania blamed him, strapped him into an electric chair, and killed him on June 8th, 1931. On June 13th, 2022, the state of Pennsylvania exonerated Alexander McClay Williams. The state said he didn't kill the white woman. The state said he was innocent and didn't deserve to die. Too late for Alexander, and too soon for so many young Black people who would come later.
Brother Richard, I'm sorry, I was on mute. Can we see that frame, that last frame?
Of the
the film.
video that we just showed?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Just want to
yes.
show the picture. We're working on a series of films
turns men into beasts.
about Alexander McClay Williams, and the first one in a series of films is, I call it Framing Alexander. And I call it framing for two different reasons. One, because legally speaking, he was framed. He was set up and he was framed. And he was charged with something that he did not do, going back to 1931. I guess it was easy to do that kind of thing. But the other thing about framing Alexander is that I'm wanting to put Alexander in context with the other pictures that are part of this poster. This is a poster that I designed. It's one like some posters that I've seen before, but I'm sure those of you that are looking at this poster recognize a number of people, if not all of the people here. All of these people came after Alexander. 1931, Alexander McClay Williams is electrocuted. In the four corners of this poster are the four little girls that were part of the bombing of Birmingham. You've got Breonna Taylor, you've got Ahmaud Arbery, you've got very well-known Emmett Till, you've got Trayvon Martin, you've got George Stinney. Some people may or may not know, but little Bobby Hutton, middle to the right, he was the first Black Panther Party member. He was 16 years old when he was killed. You've got Fred Hampton, became a little more popular when a movie called Judas and the Black Messiah came out a couple of years ago. And then in front of me at the bottom is, oh my God, I don't know why I always immediately skip his name. Does anybody know the name of the young man whose name will come to me in a minute? Next to Fred Hampton, anybody know that name?
Khalif Browder, I believe.
There we go, Khalif Browder. Thank you so much. I don't know why I can never remember Khalif Browder's name. I look in his eyes and immediately become hypnotized. Khalif Browder was falsely accused. I can't remember the year, but he went through so much. He ultimately wound up committing suicide after he went through so much injustice. But I call this Framing Alexander because the pictures around Alexander are the pictures of people who came after him. Yet Alexander's name is unknown, little known, if unknown altogether. I'm going to come back to that though. Can we go to the next slide, please? And thank you for the person who remembered Khalif Browder. Again, as I said at the very beginning of this, remembering, putting it back together is crucial. We need to know where we came from. We need to know what happened. We need to put the pieces back together.
Brother's name to be cleared. Alexander.
So here we go. This is
convicted and
Alexander McClay Williams.
Delaware County woman.
If we could go to the next slide. As I've already said, Alexander McClay Williams was 16 years old, falsely accused of stabbing a white woman at the Glen Mills School in Glen Mills, Pennsylvania, not far from the city of Chester. He was electrocuted in 1931. He remains the youngest person to be electrocuted in Pennsylvania. He was exonerated in June 2022. The next slide, please, bro. Alexander McClay Williams is Walker Carter Jr.'s uncle. To me, when I learned that, I was stumped. I was stumped. I had heard the story of Alexander McClay Williams back in 2001 when a researcher named Sam Lemon came into my office. I was running a magazine called Perspective. A researcher, writer in Media, Pennsylvania named Sam Lemon, who's done a lot of great work around the exoneration of Alexander McClay Williams. He came into my office. He was telling me about his great-great-grandfather, a guy named Ridley, who was the lawyer who was hired at damn near no money to defend this 16-year-old Black boy. It didn't take more than 7 months for them to arrest and execute Alexander. But I want to pause again and say Alexander, who was electrocuted in 1931 at the age of 16, is the uncle of Widener's Walker Carter Jr. When I learned it, I just went, this is incredible. This is incredible. This is a story that needs to be told. When I came up with the title for this presentation, I called it Connection and Coincidence. And we don't have the time now, but I think part of what we will be exploring in the future is the connection and the coincidence. And coincidence should actually have a question mark, and it could have a question mark for some people, but there's definitely some things that need to be considered. And I've already said this also as it relates to this slide here. Before Emmett Till, 1955, Money, Mississippi. Before George Stinney, 1944, South Carolina, there was Alexander McClay Williams. For those of you that have seen the movie The Green Mile with Michael Clark Duncan, that movie is based off the life of George Stinney, although a grown man played that role. George Stinney was 14 years old. A movie came out about Mamie Till, I think maybe last year, called Till. Emmett Till was killed in 1955. Again, we know his name. Alexander McClay Williams was electrocuted at the age of 16 in 1931. Can we go to the next slide, please? We're about to wrap it up here. Only got a couple more things here. All right, I want to introduce you to Susie Williams Carter. I met her back in 2019 when I was doing the documentary about her son, Walker Carter Jr. And at that time, I didn't know that she was the sister of Alexander McClay Williams. In my role as a filmmaker writer, I have to do some very difficult things, and I have to ask some very dumb questions sometimes. And I'll tell you about the dumb question in a moment. Can we roll the last short film, please?
You just don't know how that made me feel. You just.
I sat with Miss Susie last, maybe July or August. I think it was July or August. And I reflected on meeting her for the first time in 2019. Well, and by the time I met her last year, I knew the connection between Widener's Walker Carter Jr. and her brother, Alexander McClay Williams. And with like a lot of my work, it's sometimes, it's like an outer body experience. I'm sitting there talking with a woman whose brother was electrocuted when she was just about a year old, and whose son was electrocuted in the same month of June. When I did the same month of June in 2017, when I did the interview with Mrs. Claudette Carter and her family, they were just 2 years beyond the passing of Walker Carter. And sitting with Miss Susie, I had to ask the dumb question, how did you feel when you woke up and found that Walker had passed away from being electrocuted? It's a necessary question because if I'm telling a story to an audience, the audience wants to know. But how would you expect for her to feel? This is a story that has to be told, and I think in the end, how the story is told and how many stories are told is still up for consideration. There are a lot of stories that can be told here. I think there's stories that can be told about Walker very specifically by himself, and his wife is working, actually has finished a book, and if she's here, she'll spend some time talking about that. And there's a story that should be told about these two men together. Their lives, even though separated by decades, they are connected. They are family. And as fate would have it, both of them would die of electrocution. Brother Richard, help me out. But that was the last slide. Am I correct? That was the last piece? I think that was the last. Okay, so here we go. Yeah, so here's the last slide. With a number of people actually around the country right now, I am engaged in an effort very similar to what I did with the MOVE bombing, which required people from all around the country to get involved. Media Courthouse, there's a media courthouse that is currently called the Freinfeld Building, and that picture, as it says, is the Adult Probation and Parole Juvenile Courthouse. It's called Freinfeld. It is named for a judge whose name is W. Roger Freinfeld. Roger Freinfeld was the judge who sentenced Alexander McClay Williams to death. Roger Freinfeld's name is on the juvenile courthouse. We believe that Alexander McClay Williams's name should be on that courthouse as well. We are pushing to get the name Alexander McClay Williams on that courthouse. There's no place in the country where a courthouse is named for a Black child. I know that there's some markers and some statues, like Emmett Till has a statue not far from the courthouse in Money, Mississippi. There's a placard for George Stinney. I don't know where it is in relation to the courthouse, but we want Alexander McClay's name on the courthouse. The only place where you can find Alexander McClay Williams's name is in Green Lawn Cemetery, which is located in Chester Township, maybe about 3 miles from the campus of Widener. We want his name uplifted and put onto that courthouse. And we've had conversations with Delaware County Council about this. And the chair, Dr. Monica Taylor, has assured us that it is something that Delaware County Council would like to pursue as well. Before we asked Delaware County about this possibility, there was no protocol in place, no policy in place to even make a name change like this to a public space or a public place. And we believe that it is very fitting then that Alexander McClay Williams be the first person to have his name placed on that building. We don't want the Freinfeld name to be removed. We want the Freinfeld name to stay. We want it to be the Williams Freinfeld building to show the shared history of these two people. So we don't think that we have to get into a thing of take his name down, put another name up. But we don't think that Alexander McClay Williams's name should just be sitting out in an obscure graveyard. We believe that this would send a message across the country, across the world, about how we are supposed to remember Black children in this situation, or victims of serious injustice. So that is what our fight is there. And then we're also talking with the Chester Upland School District Superintendent. I'm working with a group of students at STEM Academy in Chester, which is a high school. And we want to get Walker Carter's jersey retired in perpetuity is what they call it. And as a matter of fact, Coach Manlove, who coached Walker Carter at Widener, has advised us to do the same thing at Widener, not to retire the jersey, but to have it placed in perpetuity, which means that somebody would wear it and they would wear it in honor of Walker Carter. So if somebody asked me, well, what can we do to help? I am going to place a link in the chat that can take you to a change.org campaign that we have. And we've got that campaign up there, not just as a formality, but we want people to know that we want that courthouse name changed. We don't have a lot of names on it. We really haven't pushed it that hard because we haven't had any resistance from Delaware County Council. They say they would like to add the name to the courthouse. We'd like to see them do it no later than June of this year, which would be the anniversary of his death. But we could certainly use you all spreading the word about it, about the name change. We would love to see anybody who could help us with the jersey at Widener, help us get that jersey moved. We would like to see Walker Carter's jersey retired, placed in perpetuity, and have somebody running around with that jersey on so that people know that who Walker Carter was. And there's some other things that we can do, but I'd like to end it there because we're at 12:45 now. And as I said earlier, some of the best new ideas come from conversations. Do we have about 10 or 15 minutes, Brother Richard?
We
Dr.
do,
Wise?
and I think you mentioned that you wanted to make reference to a founding member that may be here. There's a person listed, the Carter family, that had their hand up earlier.
Yeah. Well, I also want to make sure that anybody else who might have something to say chimes in, because I'm not sure if they're still here. I do see somebody there. Can we just take general questions if we have them until someone else shows up?
Yeah, questions, reactions, comments, as we usually do. We would just ask a person either raise their hand and unmute. They can ask directly, and we'll look in the chat as well. Comments, reactions, questions. And I see some, actually. Let's go to the chat. Tangela says, it's amazing how all these white men are exalted and preserved in American history by these statues. That may have been earlier, but no, that's fairly recent. Wow, very powerful. Checking art to Black social justice in this way is very powerful. Is there a way to get a copy of the video that was shown about Walker L. Carter?
Well, that's available on YouTube, and I'm pretty sure you can download it if you actually want a hard copy, but it is available on YouTube.
One of the things, Butch, I have a question. One of the things you had said that you had thought that this was going to take place in April. Just update the audience again in terms of where everything is and/or how they can be of support.
Mm-hmm. So County Council did not have a protocol policy in place for changing the names. Delaware County Council is the county. Delaware County is the county in which Widener resides, as well as Chester, and it's the county in which Alexander McClay Williams was arrested and tried. So they didn't have a policy in place for how to make a name change. They literally had to write a policy to make that happen. So we started this conversation with them back in October 2022 about changing this name. So when I spoke with Dr. Taylor in February, right before my first Widener presentation, she told me it was a policy that was being drafted and that they were going to bring it to the table in April. I looked at the minutes of April and I didn't see that. So we're hoping that that policy will be drafted and made available for their next presentation or for their next session, which is in May. So once we get that policy drafted, they have something to act on. And then she said she'd like to put together a task force to talk about the name change. So that's where we stand right now, making sure that the policy is drafted, adopted by Delaware County, and then we will have a task force that looks specifically at the Fronfield building and changing the name of that. Anybody who would like to help with that, again, the first thing I'd recommend is if I'm going to drop the change.org link in the chat, but I'd recommend that you what am I trying to say? Support the change.org, but then also, Brother Richard, you and I have talked about this. I'd love to have a group at Widener. If anybody would like to convene a small group at Widener to talk about what Widener specifically can do, what a group of Widener folks can specifically do to help this cause. I'd love to come by, we can sit, we can talk, and we can make something happen directly on the campus of Widener.
Absolutely. First and foremost, I'm committed to that, and I want to give Dean Lawrence a chance for his comment or question.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Mr. Slaughter, first, let me thank you for, again, your presentation. I did come to your presentation in February in person in Alumni Auditorium, but having seen this again, I just wanted to say that the most moving part for me, obviously, and when I say obviously, because we talked about this when I saw you in person, is Alexander's sister, Walker Carter's mother. Just powerful, just the visual art. And although she had very few words to say, you just don't know. For me, it strikes a chord on so many levels, but I am a person who, at my age and stage in my mid-50s, I have probably, I think it's 23 aunts, uncles, when you combine both sides of the family. And of that 23, I only have 2 left. One aunt on my mother's side, one uncle on my father's side. So it's been a lot of funerals in my experience. But I bring that up in saying the power of the visual. Just seeing her on the screen reminds me of images of my grandmother and aunts when it was black and white pictures from the 1950s and the 1940s. So there's the visual power. Then her few words, the visual power. The question I have for you is, I believe there was a slide that showed Walker Carter Williams' siblings, as well as Walker Carter's mom. I don't know if there's any siblings that were still alive or are still alive, or if she was an only child. But my question for you is, in the growing of the project, is there or has there been opportunity to talk to others aside from his wife, children, and his mom, Walker Carter Williams? Is there a growing opportunity to get more of what may be oral history that weaves a bigger picture than the very powerful one that you've started with? That is my question.
Thank you so much. And the answer is a resounding yes. The more I show this, the more people show up. So I've heard from family members, I've heard from a lot of friends, I've heard from teammates, I've heard from neighbors, I've heard from so many people. And it does speak to the breadth of this possibility that, and I just want to point out the one thing that you said that it made me want to cry, because she was looking at me when she said, "You don't know." And like you said, also, I was thinking about my grandmother. And I remember the day my mother died and watching my grandmother struggle in that moment. She had very little to say. And Miss Susie had very little to say, but what she did say, everybody here got it. We all got it. And so part of holding forums like this is to get more people to come out and have something to add to this. It's why I call it the Walker Williams Project. It's not just a film, it's a forum, it's a consideration. I really do want to go back to, and I don't know what department something like this would happen out of, but who doesn't think how interesting it is that these 2 men were electrocuted? I mean, that is just mind-boggling. And so we could get into the thing of, we don't have to go religious, we don't have to go, we don't have to do anything, but we can talk about these 2 men connected across decades and their similar fate. And I don't even want to view it just as a bad thing, so to speak, but it was almost like they were talking to one another. There was some conversation between the 2 of them. And so I'm going to continue to do forums like this with the help of Brother Richard, Dr. Wise, and everybody here. I'm going to continue to do this because it is an ongoing conversation. And it is actually the thing that brings up other stories from other families. One of the things that Miss Susie said to me that I thought I know a lot of people who can relate to, she said they never talked about Alexander when they were little because her father in particular was so ashamed of what happened. How many of us deal with shame at that level in our families? A lot of us. We don't talk because we're ashamed. I didn't want to talk about what happened to my mother. I used to make up all kinds of lies about what happened to my mother because I was ashamed. My father shot and killed my mother. Who wants to say that? And so the more we gather, I hope the more we can gather and the more we can pull in other people. I hope I didn't overdo that answer, and I hope I did answer it.
Please, I think I see Jennifer Juan with a comment. Or question.
Excuse my voice, it's limited today. But one of the things that I was thinking just from a perspective of Widener and community and university, this whole idea of remembering, like membering and thinking of all the different ways that Widener, just a suggestion, like every department, every major, most areas academically can relate to that concept of what it means to remember, and the way that you put it before about what remembering actually entails and bringing members together and members of the story. And maybe if individuals on campus in honor of Widener or some kind of, I don't want to say campaign, but being able to use that as a way to gather members from all different types of study and focus and honor of, being part of the community, ways to use the membering as, and asking people to remember someone personally, like you asked us to, personalizing it. And then in honor of that, bringing that energy towards this work.
Excellent. Thank you. A quick comment. Great. There's Miss Claudette Carter.
That
Please
is
unmute.
Walker Carter's wife.
Thank you. Please unmute if you're able to, Miss Carter.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us.
Oh, no problem.
Turn your camera on. Just FYI, your camera's off.
Okay. Well, anyway, my camera's off because my hair is not done. But anyway, I appreciate everything that Butch has done with the production, interviewing my grandmother, my mother-in-law, like he did, and asking her those serious questions, because Walker's family has a beautiful history. They are really the original owners of the property I live on now, which the neighbors named it Walker's Way. So his family was with, what's the name of the company with, I can't even, that's near me. Anyway, with all the different stores throughout the area. My mother used to walk to that store. You remember, Butch, what she told you?
Was it Wolf's?
Wolf's too, but no, the major chain begins with a W. I can't remember what it is.
It's not Wawa.
Yes, Wawa.
Wawa. Mm-hmm.
She told you she walked to Wawa,
right.
And it was a store. It was one store, and she would buy her milk and walk back from the store. I mean, they have a beautiful history in this area. That's why, he built our family home on this property, because even when they came from the South, his grandfather came as a slave, and he fled from the South and came here and bought this land, and just, was here in the area for years. They've been here, I know, over 100 years, him and his family, even with his grandfather. So everything was built kind of around them, because the Carter family has that kind of rich history out here in the area. And even with some of the land being stolen from our family, where they said the land folded over into itself when we built our home here, but was just touching when you interviewed my mother-in-law, if you remember, she brought all that, I mean, excellent history because she's pretty sharp. And at 93 years old, she was telling you how, you know, everything was just here, built around her and her family when they moved here, and the way her father had to flee from the South because he was accused of a murder as well down there, which he hadn't committed. So he fled from the South to come here and bought this land and just built a home for his family here. And so it just touched my heart when you interviewed her because she said some powerful things.
You know, one of the things that I don't want to forget, Miss Claudette, is that your mother-in-law just turned 93 on February the 1st.
Right.
So for me, there's an urgency in this matter that I would love to see this courthouse name changed so that she can see that. She's seen so much in her lifetime that and she struggled hard along with Sam Lemon to get that exoneration. I would love to see her see everything she can see, everything that she is due now, right now.
Before
so
she
when people
died.
ask me, yes, and so when people ask me what we can do, I say again, spread the word. I put the link to the change.org in there. Brother Richard can be in contact with me. I'm easy to find. We can start a whole nother sub movement as far as I'm concerned, and make this thing happen. I would love to see that courthouse name changed so that she can sit there and look up and see her brother's name up there.
Excellent. Sounds good.
Yeah, and
Thank you for being here.
Just to make a quick comment. So there are some people who have to leave, they're rushing off to teach, et cetera. So we appreciate all the people that have attended. I'm going to just go a couple minutes over, but just wanted to acknowledge that some people typically have to leave to run to other meetings in the class. But this is only the beginning, you know, in terms of the, you know, support, you know, of myself and I'm sure others. I mean, I don't speak officially for the university, but I speak for myself. And I will help to organize on the campus. One is to bring more students aware of what they can do, and other, you know, staff, faculty, administrators. And of the two events, this being the second, there are many more people to reach in this campus. And then finally, just a short comment I have, either if you go back to the previous Ngoma presentation that we did, which illuminated Georgetown University and complicity with complicit behavior in terms of enslavement. I mean, African-American history is right in the room always, as Ms. Carter pointed out. And if you go back to the keynote speech and the book addressed by the president in that interview, you saw the history of the criminalization of Black women who were held in chain gangs, and Black people in particular who often either fled from the South or, you know, to the North. So it's the work that you're doing. And again, Ms. Carter, thanks for joining us. It's just very, very vital and important work. And I think, again, I'm not speaking as officially for the institution, but it's my belief that Widener should be involved in multiple and on multiple levels, and in the county. So would you give any contact information, Butch, that you'd like people to have publicly, and then we'll continue to work and schedule another forum and opportunity.
I am going to type my email address right now, and I can be reached directly there. UlyssesButchSlaughter@gmail.com. And like I said, this is urgent for me. And I think that it is something that beyond the urgency for me, I think our time calls for a remembering, a setting the scales right. This is a time for a kind of justice. And so anybody who wants to reach out to me, please do. There's my